for Pacifica Radio, May 22nd, 2024. I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Antiwar Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm editorial director of Antiwar.com and author of the book Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. You can find my full interview archive, more than 6,000 of them now, going back to 2003, at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, our guest today is the great Max Blumenthal from thegrayzone.com. And of course, he's the author of the books Goliath and the 51-Day War. And of course, Management of Savagery, which is the Max Blumenthal version of Enough Already. And I think you'll like them both. Welcome back to the show, Max. How are you doing?
Good to be back.
Did I mention you're the editor-in-chief of thegrayzone.com, the great website full of great journalists doing great work all the time. And we're going to talk about your latest there in a little bit. But first of all, I was hoping you can help me out because here on the show for the past many weeks, basically we just cover the war in Gaza, and I interview my guys from antiwar.com especially, and we just talk about that. And I really have been neglecting the story of the war at home as it has developed, especially with the campus protests, but also all the counter reaction to that and the censorship and everything that's going on. And I'm up to my eyebrows in my book I'm writing about a whole different subject right now. And so I've really just been negligent on the issue. And yet I heard a recent interview of yours where you, of course, are keeping score like no one else about how all these things are playing out and what it all means. So I was wondering if we could start with that, and you could tell us a little bit about, does it all start at Columbia, or where do you want to go?
Well, I think it began with the announcement of a campaign of boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. I've been participating in this movement for well over a decade.
Yeah.
For about a decade.
Yeah.
And that's really when it first started gaining steam. There was a new generation on campus. They were heavily influenced by, my generation. I'm 46, Generation X, sort of at the end of Gen X. We went through the Second Intifada, 9/11, the Iraq War, all at the same time. Then the 2006 assault on southern Lebanon. Then 2008, 2009, the first major Israeli assault on Gaza, Operation Cast Lead, which was shocking to witness at the time, but pales in comparison to what we're witnessing now, where Israel's just destroyed almost the entire Gaza Strip. But this new generation kind of gained its steam, its momentum after Operation Protective Edge in 2014, when we started to see that Israel was primed for genocide and it destroyed the border regions of Gaza completely. I covered that war and came back and participated sort of as a journalist, an advocacy journalist, speaking at divestment drives about what I saw. University of Michigan, I spoke there. It was massive. I could tell something was happening on campus. And I got to witness how the student government voted and how pro-Israel forces were being indoctrinated and mobilized. And, they had these adults kind of coaching them. The Palestine Solidarity movement was just fully grassroots. And I was the closest thing to an adult in the room. And I was sort of following their lead. Several members of the student government who voted down divestment had been taken by AIPAC on trips and were promised internships and jobs after they graduated. So you could really see how threatening this was for the Israel lobby. Flash forward to 2024, this is now a nationwide phenomenon, not just on campuses, but these campus rebellions have really shaken Israel to its core. The U.S. special relationship is not only threatened by this, but U.S. empire itself. 2 weeks ago in Washington, D.C., there was a conference called the Strategic Competitiveness Project, run by Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google. He's now in charge of the Pentagon's third offset, which aims to compete with China on AI weapons. And Schmidt convened this conference of spooks and military honchos in DC, mostly focused on tech and the role that tech plays in competing with Russia and China, especially China. But of course, Israel, Palestine, and Gaza took center stage. And at one of the main panels, featuring Mark Milley, Aaron Ross Sorkin, the bootlicking stenographer for Power from the New York Times, Wall Street Reporter, and Alex Karp, CEO of Palantir, which was co-founded by Peter Thiel of the PayPal Mafia, is one of the major private spying firms in the world and helps provide Ukraine with targeting. They have a contract with the Ukrainian military. Alex Karp just freaked out on stage about what was happening on campuses and said, if this continues and we lose the intellectual battle with these forces, we will no longer be able to send armies to war in the West. And I think he was right in a way, because what these students are doing is they're not just targeting investments in Israel, they're targeting the whole military industry in which these campuses are so heavily invested. I mean, you look at Columbia University, they refuse to provide any transparency on their investments. They're definitely invested in the arms industry, in the big five, but they have on their board Che Johnson, who is former head of Obama's Department of Homeland Security, someone who's been liaising between the campus administration and all the law enforcement agencies that were used to basically militarily repress the students. And while he sits on the board of trustees at Columbia, he simultaneously is on the board of Lockheed Martin. So the idea is that if the students successfully divest, that starts to threaten a major source of income, not only for the contractors like Alex Karp, who feed off the corporate welfare that our tax dollars pay for, but also the big five, the blue chip companies of the military industry that supply the weapons. And then the military itself, which isn't a real military. It's not defending a republic. It's not, a standing army that's, here to defend our shores. It's essentially an unprecedented empire, as everyone who listens to this show knows, of an archipelago of bases. So these students are really hitting at the core of American empire, and the people who profit from it and who are directing wars, proxy wars, and all the hybrid warfare that comes with it are freaking out. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that really is huge. As you're saying, this guy in his fear is sort of blurting out that the people really do have the power. And what he's worried about here is the precedent being set. And, I saw some wiseacre on, I guess, the Twitter there saying, oh, yeah, nice protest, everybody. I guess the city of Austin is now going to pull its troops out of Gaza. I guess you really accomplished something. When obviously that's just he's joking around, but in a way, what he's trying to say is that they have no point. But they do have a point. They want the city of Austin to make sure that none of its investments or holdings are involved in any way in what's going on over there. And that alone is a huge precedent if they can force the city government to go along with that. And then you make such an important point, Max, about divestment when it comes to these universities doesn't just mean sell your stocks in Lockheed, but we're talking about massive research projects subsidized by the public at these universities in order to benefit the military-industrial complex in a real genius sort of a way, from lasers and microchips and everything in between, right? And so if they can really force that issue, that the students are no longer going to let the universities go along with the Pentagon and these programs, that really hits them where it hurts, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, I think at Columbia University, the students found at least $7 million alone in research sponsored by the Pentagon. And that's a lot of bang for the Pentagon's buck. These are the places where the Pentagon aims to outpace China in the great strategic competition that Eric Schmidt is in charge of leading, particularly when it comes to AI. So it's a lot more threatening than I think what even the anti-Vietnam War movement was doing, leading, for example, sit-ins at MIT, which was a major center of research on the Vietnam War, it, actually, there was a professor there, Noam Chomsky, who was getting paid through a Pentagon project to assist with surveillance devices that they were using in Vietnam. And he later, when he learned what he was doing, he later became a part of the anti-Vietnam War movement. But these were sort of isolated. First of all, the protests were isolated, much more isolated during the anti-Vietnam War protest movement era. But the research was much more isolated. You now have research going on across the country, and it's not just really advanced AI research. It's also police training being conducted by Israelis through, for example, Georgia State University. And, the Cop City, the movement that's mobilized against Cop City outside Atlanta has been heavily involved in challenging these so-called police exchanges, where Israeli state security and police come in and actually train U.S. police as if there's anything we can learn from them. But Georgia State is a major base of training. We're talking about thousands of cops who've been trained by Israel, including cops on campuses, university police.
And isn't it interesting, Max, how it's the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, or now of America, the same guys who lied us into war. The Jinsa crowd is what Colin Powell called them, who lied us into war with Iraq. They're the guys who are most responsible for this Israeli occupation forces training American cops project all these years.
You have, Jinsa not only training American cops, they take American former generals. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of former military officers, all the way to the general level, to Israel for propaganda trips. And one of those former generals, he was, I believe, a colonel, and I'm forgetting his name, but, not a very significant figure, who went on one of these Jinsa trips, was obviously moved enough to write op-eds defending the special relationship with Israel afterwards. His mercenary firm is being put up for the contract to help maintain this so-called aid pier off the coast of Gaza. So it's essentially Israel maintaining a U.S. aid pier with American faces.
All right. So now on the Colombia thing, I guess what I had in mind there at the beginning was that it seemed like these kids had a pretty small little encampment there, and they called out ruthless forces to smash them on the Ferguson style, which caused, of course, a massive reaction and just grew the protest movement by leaps and bounds. But, of course, all of that, and I know the whole thing's going on across the country at UT and UCLA and a lot of other places as well. But, of course, we're also up against the end of the school year. So where does that leave the leftist, definitely student-led anti-war protest movement? Where do they go now?
Well, these are faculty-supported movements. At Columbia, we saw a massive show of support by Columbia University faculty for the students and against Manoush Shafiq, this completely callow president who called for immediately sent in the NYPD in an unprecedented move onto campus to attack the students, to arrest them, to ban them from their own dorms, which they'd paid for. And a very similar thing took place at UMass, where I spoke. I got there just hours after a military-style repression of a completely peaceful encampment in which students were brutalized, then held in zip ties for 6 hours, not allowed to go to the bathroom. Female students weren't allowed to change their tampons. The chancellor of UMass and Manoush Shafiq have now faced an overwhelming vote of no confidence. We're talking about over 80% of faculty voting no confidence in university leadership. So that's part of the fallout. The students obviously see what the American university is, and it's essentially a hedge fund for corporate elites, with them as basically paying into it without having any voice in how that money is spent. And so I think we're going to see this continue into the next year. It might not be as sexy if there's a ceasefire. Columbia had a major divestment drive that started in 2018. And in 2022, the students succeeded in getting a successful vote from the student council for divestment from these military companies involved with Israel, and the school refused to obey that. So they just rejected the students' voice. After, the students are paying like $80,000 a year to be there. So that's really what actually drove this encampment, was that their wishes, their democratic will was not being respected on campus. So we're going to continue to see those drives. They're going to get more attention than before. They're going to be more successful than before. And what we're going to see now that the semester is over, as we've witnessed protests at commencement ceremonies, Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary here at George Washington University, was interrupted throughout her entire speech. This is someone who had a contract through Tony Blinken's consulting firm, West Exec Advisors, to consult for a spy tech firm based in Israel between the time she was MSNBC's top Biden propagandist and while she was serving in the Obama administration. So we've seen those protests at the commencement ceremonies. I think these students have a plan that goes well beyond campus. I know this from talking to them. They're keeping their plan very close to their chest. But I think it involves Chicago, the Democratic National Convention. And just in talking to some of the activists who were involved in planning the protests there, they really believe this protest is existential. Either their voice gets heard at the Democratic Convention and Biden feels their wrath, or the policy continues. The policy of genocide continues unabated, and Israel maintains its impunity from the Biden administration. There was some talk about, let's go to the Republican National Committee, RNC, the Republican National Convention, protest there. I'm sure there will be protests there, but the RNC doesn't take this constituency, the activist left, the anti-war left, for granted. They don't say every year, we're going to throw out a bunch of culture war issues like abortion and, gay rights and the right to vote, and expect that they'll overlook the fact that we are supplying weapons to enable an apartheid state to conduct an industrial level slaughter of children. And what the activist left, the anti-war left, is now saying is, we're just not, that model of politics is over. And if we force them to lose, to suffer the consequences, then they'll have to listen to us on the day after. And we'll see that model tested. And I think the students who mobilized on campuses across the country are going to have to converge in one place to really have their voices heard on a national level.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code SCOTT and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Real history, real economics, real education.
People say to me, Scott, how do you get so much work done all the time? Coffee. It helps keep me from falling asleep. And it tastes really good because I get it from Moondo's Artisan Coffee at moondosartisancoffee.com. Moondo's is kind of the anti-Starbucks in that their coffee tastes real good. They have lots of great choices, representing all kinds of regions, blends, and flavors. I'm drinking the Ethiopian presently. Hey, wait, also, do you like saving money on good tasting coffee? Right now you can get 10% off and help support this show if you just go to moondosartisancoffee.com/Horton. Find the link and the QR code in the margin at scotthorton.org. That's moondosartisancoffee.com/Horton. All right, it's Antiwar Radio. I'm Scott Horton talking with the great Max Blumenthal here. And, on that left-liberal divide, it's not even necessarily the left-liberal divide because the polls say that 70% of Democratic voters want to end this war right now. So you can call that the left if you want, but I think that includes people, who are really just plain old liberals or progressives who, really aren't further to the left than that at all, who are just absolutely disgusted with this. So that makes it seem at least like a real ruler versus ruled sort of divide there, the voters versus the party elite. But I wonder, is there anyone in the party elite who's getting this through their thick skull that they better fix this on the Democratic side? Or it really is just the people versus the power here?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we can see that in the way that the Biden administration has reacted to the ICC warrant for Netanyahu, where they not only celebrated the kind of ridiculous ICC warrant for Vladimir Putin for evacuating ethnically Russian children from the front lines of the war. They engineered that warrant. The State Department, as we exposed at the Grayzone, the State Department funded the research that went into the warrant for Putin. And now they're denouncing the ICC. They are denouncing the UN. Antony Blinken reportedly threatened to defund the UN and to defund the World Food Program and starve people if the UN recognized a Palestinian state. So that shows you the level that they're invested in providing Israel with total impunity. Biden just forked over $700 million in tank munitions, as well as $500 million for tactical vehicles for Israel to continue its genocide. He's not exercising any leverage. He continues to protect Israel at the highest level. Why? Because it's all about the Benjamins. At least 1/3 of Biden's top donors have expressed pro-Israel views, as Eli Clifton reported at Responsible Statecraft. But if you zoom in, the more you zoom in on those donors, they're providing a disproportionate amount of Biden's funding. And Biden is raising a record haul despite being possibly clinically brain dead. I mean, he's slurring his speech like never before. He gets a special award if he can get through speech reading the teleprompters at a high school level. So yet he's raking in something like $40-50 million a month. And that's all the Democrats care about. They don't care about humanity. They don't care about the slaughtering of children, the destruction of families. They don't care. They're in their own bubble. They had actually hoped, I mean, if you actually go back to December, January, follow the language of the Democratic consultant class, they were all talking about this going away, and the activist base and their sort of progressive constituents just forgetting about it and focusing on what really matters, like abortion. It hasn't gone away. In fact, the intensity of feeling has deepened among the progressive base. And the State Department of Tony Blinken at that time was talking about the day after Israel wins and just mops up Hamas, we're going to put in some Palestinian Authority, and then we're going to flood the zone with aid and blah, blah, blah. All the regime change delusions came back to the fore, and now they're not using that language anymore. They're in a state of panic. They have no plan. Netanyahu has no plan. He's bogged down in Gaza. The Israeli military is taking losses all across Gaza Strip. I mean, we're talking about the Jabalia refugee camp all the way in the north, which they said was an operational hold when they withdrew their soldiers in early January. They're back there taking losses. They cannot win. They cannot achieve their objectives. A major hostage video just appeared today of 3 female soldiers, siege masters, who were involved as spotters in the siege of Gaza, who were captured on the Nahal Oz base by Qassam teams of Hamas on October 7th. And those videos have hit Israel like a shockwave, like a political earthquake.
And by the way, after being abandoned by their fellow soldiers who climbed out the window and left them behind, which I read in Israeli media, Max.
Exactly. They couldn't, I guess they couldn't get out the window in time.
Unbelievable.
But these women's job was to actually spot quote unquote terrorists before they crossed the border fence, and they failed completely. They all got captured, and they're prisoners of war now. They're not hostages. Let's not call them hostages. They're prisoners of war. Completely fair game. Civilians who are living in the kibbutzim, those are hostages, but these are soldiers in a war. And Israel has no means of rescuing them other than negotiating and calling for a ceasefire. And the Democratic Party, you know, the party of Joe Biden is doing nothing to force that. So it is really a disastrous political situation that Biden has engineered for himself, but all he's done is follow the model of every Democratic presidential candidate since, I don't know, could we say 1980, 1984, ever since they just started kowtowing to the Israel lobby.
Yeah, or 48.
48, maybe. I mean, there was sort of a clash between Teddy Kennedy, who was in the pocket of the Israel lobby, and Jimmy Carter at the, what was it, the 1980 convention, because Carter had done Camp David, which was obviously to Israel's interest. But the point is, there's no daylight. There has been no daylight between any Democratic presidential candidate and Israel since around that time. And that's finally because of a new generation at the progressive base of the Democratic Party, which is more politically conscious, rejects legacy media. Many of them actually know Palestinians. More of them are Muslim than ever before. They're really finding their voice now. And at the same time, they're not finding an alternative. There isn't really momentum behind an independent candidate that I can detect right now. So this could go in any direction, but right now it's remaining sort of uncommitted to Biden, and more people, including like Fareed Zakaria, who has typically been a voice of the Democrats and their State Department, are predicting that Biden will lose.
What about Jill Stein? She's the Green Party candidate, right?
She is. She's going to be on the ballot in like 20 to 30 states.
Mm-hmm. And she's reliably good on this, isn't she?
She's taken a good line on it, but I'm just not seeing a convergence behind her of the forces that are really leading the I can't put my finger on it, but I'm not seeing the kind of broad convergence behind her that we need to see in order
that's up to her to create it.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we're almost out of time here, Max, but can you just give us a minute or two here on this latest piece? Israeli soldier from Notorious Unit confesses to U.S. citizens killing. Do I really have this right? This is an American Israeli killing an American Palestinian?
Yeah. This is far from the first time this has happened. It's confirmed that his unit, Netzah Yehuda, which is a battalion under the notoriously bloody Kfir Brigade, but this is a battalion of religious nationalist and ultra-Orthodox soldiers that has a terrible reputation for torture, killing, sexual abuse. They operate in the Ramallah district of the West Bank. 3 of their soldiers were just killed actually in northern Gaza, just reported today. But the State Department, the Tony Blinken State Department, announced plans to sanction this unit and said they were unremediated. And then they pulled back for no reason, and we don't know why. And they said, we're still examining this and engaged in talks with Israel. They're providing us with more information. It's like how whenever there's a massive crime committed by Israel, they say, we want them to carry out an investigation. In other words, the killer investigates themselves. So in January 2022, a group of Netzah Yehuda soldiers pulled a 78-year-old man out of his car near his house early in the morning, took him to a warehouse 100 meters away, bound him, gagged him, blindfolded him, and just left him there to torture him on a very cold and damp morning. And he had a heart attack and died. And at the Grayzone, we located audio. Actually, it was, we located audio and spoke to the person who recorded the audio, who was on a Discord chat, engaged in a series of arguments with a self-identified American who went to fight in Israel as a lone soldier and who was actually part of this unit, and provided intimate details about the killing of this 78-year-old man who happened to be an American citizen named Omar Assad, and bragged about the killing and said we wanted to do it just to like mess with this geezer because he was talking back to us. we didn't mean to kill him, but screw this guy. We'll kill 100,000. We'll kill 1 million if it means saving one of our own lives. The genocidal mentality that we now see on display in Gaza. So we thought this audio was significant, especially because the Biden administration refuses to act on this unit. And here you have someone saying, we're genocidal. He said, my whole unit, we're all racist. We're all homophobes. We hate everyone who's not like us. I mean, he's just spilling the beans about this unit, and the U.S. refuses to do anything to act. So we have provided a platform for that recording. We're seeking more information about that soldier's identity. We have his gun number, information about his background and family, but we haven't gotten his name. But he's an American. And this really, is a perfect portrait of the war that Palestinians are fighting. They're fighting foreign soldiers on their own soil, defending their farms, their land, and their cities against a foreign army backed by the United States that in many cases just consists of Americans. What would you call that? Are they terrorists for doing that?
Well, it doesn't sound like these Americans are escaping the Holocaust or anything like that,
No, they're reenacting it.
All right. We're all out of time, but that is Max Blumenthal. He's the editor-in-chief over at The Grayzone. His latest piece is with Christopher Weaver. Israeli soldier from notorious unit confesses to U.S. citizens killing. Thanks so much for your time again, Max.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
That's it for Antiwar Radio for today. I'm Scott Horton. Find the full interview archive at scotthorton.org. And I'm here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. See you next week.